Hi, everyone. Good evening and welcome to tonight's session of CBS's Leadership Speaker Series. My name is Tanvi Paskar. I'm a member of the class of 2021 at CBS, and I'm the co-president of the Technology and Data Analytics Association, or TDA. It is my pleasure to officially welcome my fellow students, faculty members, staff, and esteemed panelists this evening. The CBS Leadership Speaker Series was established to offer students access to those at the very center of business, giving us an opportunity to learn from CEOs, founders, and distinguished business leaders. Tonight, we will hear from Dean McLaris, Professor Jonathan Nee, and Rick Elias. After an introduction of our panelists by Dean McLaris, Professor Nee will lead Mr. Elias in conversation about his professional experience as an entrepreneur and advice and lessons for current students. Guests will then have an opportunity to participate in a live Q&A session. So please use the Q&A button to submit your question at any point during the conversation. So without further ado, I will pass it on to Dean McLaris, the 16th Dean and David and Lynn Sullivan Professor of Business at Columbia Business School.
Thank you, Tanvi. Thank you very much for welcoming us this evening, and thank you for the work in the Technology and Data Analytics Association. So this is, as Tanvi was telling us, this is a speaker series that we started back in the summer. And the idea is to bring real influential leaders to our community to hear their thoughts and having interesting, provocative discussions. And today we have an amazing program ahead of us. Rick Elias is here with us and moderated by my friend Jonathan Nee, and I'm sure it's going to be a lively and interesting discussion. I'll keep my introduction short, but I'll share a few factoids for each of our two participants. So Rick graduated from Harvard Business School. We're not going to hold it against you, Rick, and is the co-founder and CEO of Red Ventures, a portfolio of digital companies headquartered in Charlotte, North Carolina. And it spans many industries, including home services, financial services, health services, travel, entertainment, and education. In 2009, Rick survived Flight 1549, the Miracle on the Hudson. I'm sure you've seen the videos, you've seen the movie, and you may have seen the viral TED Talk that Rick gave, 3 Things I Learned While My Plane Crashed, which I appreciated watching earlier today. My wife was not in the plane, but worked at a building called 787 7th Avenue on a very high up floor, and actually saw the plane coming down while it was coming down. And I remember the overwhelming feeling of both watching it and then everything that was transpiring over the next 15, 20 minutes. So Rick's leadership has earned him noteworthy recognition. He was named the Ernst & Young National Entrepreneur of the Year, and in 2016, he was inducted into the Carolinas Entrepreneur Hall of Fame. He has founded several companies, but also many social impact initiatives, including the Road to Hire, a nonprofit that connects young adults to professional development and high-earning careers. So Rick, thank you very, very much for taking the time to joining us today. With Rick, joining Rick to moderate the discussion is Jonathan Nee. Jonathan is the Michael Fries Professor of Professional Practice of Media and Technology and our co-director of our Media and Technology program here at the school. Many of you know Jonathan from his courses in media mergers and acquisitions, digital investing, and sports economics. Professor Nee is also a senior advisor to Evercore Partners, and before Evercore, he was managing director and co-head of Morgan Stanley's media group and publishing sector head in the communications, media, and entertainment group at Goldman Sachs. Prior to that, prior to becoming an investment banker, I should say, Jonathan was director of international affairs of United Airlines. Jonathan, you and I need to talk about that. I didn't know about that about you. And he was also an adjunct professor of law at Northwestern. You may have also read a lot of things that Jonathan writes. He writes at The Atlantic, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, and Washington Post, and he has also authored 3 books. So thank you, Rick. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you for joining us today, for sharing your expertise and experience with our students. So I'll leave it to you. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Dean, and thank you to the Student Association for helping to organize this as well. I think the best way for all of you to get a flavor and get the most out of having this short exposure to this extraordinary leader, Rick Elias, I think would be to start, Rick, by just telling your story, and the part of your story that is closest to what the students here have experienced recently. In other words, your story leading up to deciding to go into business school, and then what you thought about doing and what you did immediately after business school. So let's start there, and then draw the string from there to the pretty remarkable journey that you've taken since.
All right. Well, thank you for having me. It's really an honor to be here. And Jonathan, after listening to those remarks at the introduction, I think you should be the one speaking. I think you have a lot more interesting things in your journey than I do. But listen, I often joke that I'm the Forrest Gump of CEOs, meaning like there's zero chance that when I was finishing high school or college, or for that matter, business school, I thought I would be sitting in this chair. And I do realize a lot of what happens to us comes via hard work, but a lot of it is also luck. I came to the US in January 1986 as a second semester freshman. I went to Boston College. I tried to play semi-professional basketball, and I loved the game a lot more than he loved me. So I wasn't good enough to make it. So I came as a second semester freshman, and I did not know that my English was as poor as it was. So I ended up being an accounting major by default, so I didn't have to take any of the requisite classes until my later years. And that really helped me long term as a CEO. Really understanding accounting and finance has been a real valuable skill to gain, but it was completely accidental, not by personality or by choice. I thought I would go back to Puerto Rico, where I was from, and I thought, when I graduated, this would have been a good experience to be here. And there was something about this great country that I did not want to give up. I think this is the toughest place to be in business, but also the best place to be in business. This is where competition will eat you alive, or will make you the best version of yourself. So instead of going to back to Puerto Rico, I ended up joining GE. I went through their financial management program, was very fortunate to be sent to Japan for 6 months assignment. When I got to Japan, the guy there was complaining about being an expat and his taxes. And since I was an accounting major, I saw an angle. So I went to him. I said, Mr. Young, do you mind if I help you with your taxes? And he goes, please do. And he gives me this big, thick file. And for about 2 months, January through March, all I'm doing is faxing K1s back and forth to his accountant. I'm getting up at 5 a.m. and faxing stuff. April 10th comes along, and here is his, it's all taxes done. And he looks at me and he goes, no extension? And I said, no, we're done. And he goes, you're never leaving. So the funny part of that is my willingness to literally fax stuff for 2 months straight at 5 a.m. was what got me into business school, because he wrote the most glowing recommendation. And it's just, you never know what part of your life leads you to something else, even when you don't know it. And so I went to business school with the belief that I would, kind of go do my own thing. And I got the best piece of advice my second year. I was going to join an ex-boss of mine who's actually our CFO now. And I went to this professor, Gabarro, who since has passed away, and I said, hey, I always wanted to be an entrepreneur. I'm going to go do this. And he says, you know what, you're a young guy that, I've enjoyed having in my class. I'm going to give you a piece of advice. You got to go learn in someone else's nickel. You don't know enough. You got to go make a lot of mistakes. If you really want to go build a business, you got to learn how to hire people, fire people. You're going to cry when you fire people. You're going to have to learn to deal with lots of things, and you better do that in someone else's nickel. And that's what I did. I went to a company called CUC at the time, became Sendent, and I was just a middle manager. I had 6 jobs in 6 years, and by then in '99 we sold the little business I was running, and I started kind of Red Ventures. At the time it was called Red F in January 2000. So that is my journey of how I kind of made a lot of decisions throughout, but it really was around this notion that I wanted to start something at some point.
So let's pause on that. What's mostly different about the era you went to business school and now is that when you went to business school, about 50% of the graduates of all of the top 10 business schools, without exception, either went to banking or consulting.
Right.
That was where basically half of them went. Now that's no longer true. And actually now 50% don't take the advice that you say is the best advice you ever got. They go right to small companies because they imagine that they want to be entrepreneurs. So talk for a moment. You always knew you wanted to be an entrepreneur. It wasn't because it was the hot thing of the moment. It's clear that that's something you always wanted to do. Do you think the right advice was the advice you got, number one? And number two, of the people that you meet who say that they want to be entrepreneurs, are you skeptical, or do you just think that there's something in the water and all of a sudden half the people don't want to be bankers or consultants anymore? They all want to be entrepreneurs.
Yeah, so the first question, I think you can go and learn on someone else's nickel in a small environment or in a big environment. I don't think it really matters. If you're saying that the majority of the students are starting their own things when they're leaving right off the bat.
No, they're going to places with 50 or less employees.
Yeah, but that maybe you learn a lot more there, right? Because of the velocity of change and the hats you can wear and all that kind of good stuff. So I don't think that is inconsistent to the advice I got. I just ended up going to a company that was doing a ton of M&A, so they were moving people around all the time, and I felt that that was a great opportunity. On your second point, I think you got to ask yourself, why do you really want to be an entrepreneur? Some people want it because they think it's the best path for kind of creating capital and accumulating capital, and it's high risk, high reward. Some people want it because it is a path to kind of maybe becoming, known, or, being somebody that is recognized out there. For me, it was very clear why I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I'll tell you the story if you want of where did it come from, but the reason for me, and it's very clear, is I wanted to be in charge of how I spend my time. I really felt that, to me, being an entrepreneur just gave me the freedom to spend the time the way I wanted to spend it. The price to do that is a tremendous amount of responsibility. When you have 4,000 employees, when I drive into our campus, and you've been there, and it's a beautiful campus, and people see these beautiful buildings and all of that, I see car payments. I just see an insane amount of responsibility every day, and it's just something that is not for everybody. But I've enjoyed it thoroughly. It's been super challenging. I've learned. Every couple of years, I realize how little I know. And once you do that enough times, you realize that even the things that I believe today are not going to be that, relevant a couple of years from now.
So what was the moment when you concluded you had learned enough on somebody else's dime and it was the moment to go ahead on your own? What made you know that it was time?
I think life, Jonathan, is really easy to tell it in looking back. I think it's, everybody can make a narrative of life looking back. It's a lot harder to make life, visualize life in the future. What I've realized is the best way to connect dots looking back is to put enough dots on the board and to really be willing to kind of take the actions to put the dots on the board. It had a lot to do with our personal lives. We were married, we were trying to start a family, we had kind of gotten to a place that I felt this was now or never. I was about 30 years old, so this was my window. And I just, I wanted to do this, and this is a quick story, but my grandfather came from Lebanon, and he was an entrepreneur in Puerto Rico, and he was super, super successful. He was an importer of tomatoes and potatoes, and he brought the whole shipment from New Jersey. He did predatory pricing. He did all the illegal things of today, but he was, a very, very, very rich man in Puerto Rico. And then in his 60s, he got Alzheimer's, and then the government realized that he wasn't paying taxes. So my dad went from living in one of the most prestigious neighborhoods to one of the worst neighborhoods within a month's worth of time. And I never met him. I heard the mythology of my grandpa, and I always, I think in the back of my mind, wanted to be him, but try to do it in a better way.
So you made the move, and that was in 2000?
2000, January 2000.
Okay, and March of 2000 is the peak of the internet bubble. You're starting an internet company.
Okay.
And by 2001, it's a complete disaster. So I'm thinking that talking to a bunch of students who are going to business school in a pandemic, that was a different kind of pandemic. People didn't die, but lots of companies and lots of investors, at least metaphorically, passed. So having gone from the safety of working on somebody else's dime to this, talk about whether you thought about going back, shutting it down. Did you always know you were just going to push through? Just tell the story.
Yeah, so I raised $2 million from my classmates, kind of 50 grand at a time. We've been out of school for 5 years, and all the same people that you said went into investment banking and consulting had done fairly well. So I passed the hat, and at the point, everybody, you remember this things all became instant success. And so I raised that money and hired about 15 people that used to work for me. We had a terrible idea that we launched with. We thought it was great. By November, we had 117,000 left out of $2 million and zero revenue. So we had to basically let go of everybody and reset. And I had a decision to make. We could have returned 5 cents on the dollar and said, hey, bad vintage. But I wanted to go to my reunions. I'm an extrovert, and I wasn't going to go to my reunions knowing that I had all those people I lost their money for without at least giving it a fight. So we spent the next 3 years, 2001, 2, and 3, just basically selling what we knew how to do, which was direct marketing offline at the time, more in an agency type environment. And we made enough to put money in the balance sheet to call all the investors and give them their money plus 10% return. We've never paid ourselves for 4 years. And that, today you walk at Red Ventures, and you know this, Jonathan, there's a deep sense of humility, but it comes from the real struggle of where you start, and that taste of your own blood in your mouth every morning for 3 to 4 years really is something I never want us to lose as an organization and core to our culture.
And talk about what the original concept was, because it's one thing to say I'm going to start something. You gotta have an idea, and how far, what that concept is, and what I see on your website today.
Oh my goodness. It is such an embarrassing idea that I'm surprised anybody funded it. But we, at the time, all these internet companies had all this money and this crazy valuations. And I think people on the call are probably a little too young to remember. But if you go back and explore this history, and they had no profitability and no path to profitability or anything. But we were going to help all those brands spend, all these online brands, we're going to help them spend all their money in offline media to drive them back online. So, imagine a paper-based search engine. It's the worst idea you can imagine. And then we basically, we're in the middle of that, and then April happened and everybody completely kind of disappeared. Our business then morphed into an agency. We paid the investors back, sold that business to the management team, and relaunched basically a digital platform in 2005. And we realized that customer acquisition was where all the money was, and that brands were really going to struggle migrating kind of from the offline environment to the online. So at first we became a dealer of DirecTV and ADT and built a reasonably profitable business, but it was a business that was 2 phone calls away from having no business. And then in 2009, 10, we made our first pivot, which was opening up our platform for brands to use it as their own. What we did very cleverly was all performance-based. So we did not priced as an agency or priced as kind of as a software. We price it on a performance basis. So we were operating a marketing services business in the mid 40s in terms of EBIT, when what we really were doing was buying paid media online better than they could. We knew that was thin ice as brands, as more and more people got trained in digital marketing, as brands started kind of opening, getting better at this, as Google started opening up their algorithms at the double click and all that stuff. So we knew that we had a window on time. And that's when we moved from kind of a partner-centric model to owning all our brands. And today, as you know, we own a lot of the world's, great digital brands. We're the 5th largest network in terms of uniques in the US, with brands like The Points Guy and Bankrate and Healthline and now CNET and GameSpot and a lot of other brands. So but I'm not sure we're done. Like I see this very clearly moving towards world where there's no cookies, and we're pushing really hard into authenticated experiences and getting much closer to the consumer, and using this high intent network of traffic to kind of build the next evolution of direct response. And we think that there's going to be an alternative to the walled gardens, and we're hoping we have a chance to be one of those.
So you spoke before about everybody's tendency to, when they look backwards and tell the story, there's a certain amount of artifice to, it's a straight line from nothing to wild success. Give me your 2 biggest mistakes along the way.
Oh God, this month, last month, which month you want mistakes from? We have a cemetery full of bad decisions. I think what we've done really well is we have never gotten married to our bad decisions. We were, maybe we gave up on some things early, but sometimes it's better to give up on them early than to ride them until they're dead. We probably should have made, every move that we made strategically was probably too late. I think we, in every regard, it was very obvious, at least to us, by the time we made it, which means we lacked either conviction or vision. The other thing, Jonathan, that you learn is when you bootstrap a business like we did for 10 years, is that you spend all your time trying to minimize downside. And, and at some point, a business, once you get to enough altitude, if you think about it as a plane, you got to start making decisions to maximize upside. And making that transition took us too long. And it wasn't until we got some outside capital in the business, which I was completely against, and I got voted 9-1 by our leadership team, that we really kind of opened up our aperture to risk and open up our aperture to kind of, thinking a lot more broadly and outside of the US and all that stuff. So, I was dead wrong. I did not want the capital because I did not want the responsibility, but with the professional capital, we found the right partners and the right series of partners. We become a much better firm because of our partnership with them.
I do want to talk a little about your experience on the Hudson, but I want to put it in the context of, I don't think most people who are at business school realize that this is kind of the last time that they're in a safe place around a bunch of other people who are just trying to work it out. Because once you go into the real world, everybody is trying to play it a little safe. Nobody is completely open. And you develop your own story, your own face to the outside world. And it's harder to take a step back and be really honest about how you failed, what you need to do, where you really want to go. I would imagine that an event like that one, which at that point was almost, what is a little over 10 years after business school, right? You'd been out.
No, it was in 2009. So it was about 15 years.
15 years.
I graduated, yeah.
So talk about what that did to you and for you in terms of being able to ask some questions that maybe you had while you were bootstrapping yourself. At that point, I think you were beyond bootstrapping, but that maybe you had not focused on before.
Jonathan, I got the ultimate gift. I have the gift of having said goodbye to my life. Um, you know, think about it. We have a plane landing on a river with no engines. And the question is it going to blow up or is it going to break into pieces? Not, is it going to somehow miraculously land on water? And I had 90 seconds to literally take account of my life and realize all the things that I regretted, realize all the time that I wasted, and how I have misplaced my priorities. And I closed my eyes and I said, I love you. And I was rooting for the blow up version. I did not like to, it was January 15th in New York City, was not a very pleasant day. And all of a sudden we survive. And, uh, after that, when you really think about what you went through, you got to make a decision. Are you going to make something out of that gift of a second life and really learn your lesson or not? And I wrote in a piece of paper, I only have one test left. And that test is, did I make the most out of my second life? So as a result, I am a really different person. That doesn't mean that, you don't you don't have bad days or bad moments, but I am very clear on how I spend my energy. I have very little negative energy. I don't associate with people that I don't want to associate with. I'm only interested in figuring out ways to do things that matter to me. Because our egos get in the way. What happens is you leave an institution like this one, and you're like, oh, I'm an MBA from whatever, and you start believing your own stuff, and shortly enough you start doing too many things out of ego. So for me, it was realizing that, what, going back to the plain simple Puerto Rican kid that saw avocados and streetlights, that really believes he's Forrest Gump of business, it was a much simpler way of living than somebody who thought they deserved it or they were God's gift to us something.
So when you described why you always knew you were an entrepreneur, because you wanted to basically have responsibility for what you did with your own time, you also talked about the fact that every time you walk on that campus, you realize that you don't have responsibility just for your own time. You have responsibility. You're the mayor of Red Ventures. You are responsible for all of those folks. And I would say, just in interacting with you, there are very few executives or people I know who you have the sense that they know exactly where they're trying to take the company, both from a cultural perspective and from a business perspective. So talk for a second about what the culture of Red Ventures is and how you feel about your responsibility for establishing that and protecting that.
I am a big believer that culture is a competitive advantage. And if that you think about it that way and you invest in it over long periods of time, you can build something that sustains well beyond even business models or strategies. So we have been really, really focused on that. Let me open a window, Jonathan, because if I have lots of nephews and nieces that are in their 20s, and I often get the same question, which is, where should I go? They haven't attended an esteemed institution like this necessarily, but I think the advice is the same. To me, if I was going somewhere to learn on someone else's nickel, or if you don't want to be an entrepreneur and you just want to go to a place where you can, really do good work, find a company that meets these three criteria. Find a company that is growing, because when it's growing, that means that you as a younger professional are going to get opportunities ahead of your time, especially if you're willing to put in the work, especially if you're willing to take risks, especially if you're willing to kind of, go all out, which is what you want. You want a chance. Number two, find a place that is part of the future. Don't go to an industry where you know that a decade or two from now, they're not going to be around, or where they're going to be around in a different way, right? So have a point of view on where the world is going, and, find an industry that you think it aligns, that is interesting to you, but that the wind is at your back. No different than when you're investing in a company and you're looking at TAM and growth rates and all that stuff. And third, and as importantly, and this is where I'm going to tie it to your question, find a place where you think you're going to be able to be the best version of yourself. Find a company where, when you are there or when you meet the people, when you're like, you know what, I can see myself here. Because if you see yourself there, if it aligns to your way of thinking, you're going to be put in a place where you're going to be in the right mindset to grow and the right mindset to really kind of push yourself forward. Now coming back to your specific question around culture, this is one that was very interesting to me. Again, back then, I don't know if now they're doing it as much, but every company was, what is your mission? What is your vision? What are your values? And CEOs almost got graded, and to me, it just looked like a rehash of the same words. And it was very unauthentic. And since our business was changing so much, I was even concerned to write stuff down. And so one day in 2013, I was taking a flight back, and we were now gaining real momentum from Africa. We had a family vacation, and I was on one of those insane 14-hour flights. And I started just writing away. I'm not particularly a good writer. It's mostly Spanglish. But I started writing the things that I believed to be true about Red Ventures. And I wrote this manifesto of like 3 pages, and I sent it to our head of corporate comm and say, listen, maybe there's something here. And she said, holy cow, you just recreated the roadmap. So our company, so that we distilled it down to, 6 beliefs. And since that day, and those 6 beliefs is what we use to hire, to promote, to fire, to evaluate things. And it's a series of beliefs. And my belief, Jonathan, in a semantics, and I've gotten into this argument with much more successful CEOs than I am, so I don't really care to win the argument, but I made a point when people say, hey, no, we really need to be clear on values. No, values is stuff you learned at home. Values is something that, were instilled in you. Beliefs is something that you choose to believe, right? So when you come here, you got to believe a series of things to be successful here. If you don't believe them, don't come. That's okay. But those beliefs distill our culture to its essence. And what it does is it makes people either sign up for it or not.
And when you look at acquisitions, which we'll talk a little about that shortly, it's one thing to hire somebody and say, hey, here's our beliefs, you're in, you're out. It's another thing to buy up a company that may have its own complete value systems already. How do you deal with that? At what point is do you ever say, you know what, it's just too far away from where we are? There's going to be organ rejection.
No, we've interesting. What we learned is we had an acquisition where we walked in and 24 out of the 25 people were gone within a week of their senior people. And then we have organizations where we haven't touched anybody. And then we have organization where it's a bit of a hybrid. But it comes back to the same thing. If we said, hey, we don't like your values, we sit down and said, you have to be comfortable. And the beliefs are things like, we believe in running up the escalator. That has a lot to do with the pace that we play at. Right? You have to be comfortable on an environment where, perfection is not ultimately the goal, but we'll play at a fast pace. We believe that the 2-minute drill, it really gives you a lot more shots on goal. Or core to our beliefs is everything is written in pencil. And if you believe that, then this is a place where you're willing to be challenged, you're willing to learn, you're willing to, be okay. As a result, people are moving desks every year and all this stuff. So there's adaptability mindset. So that adaptability mindset, I think, is what has made us better than average at M&A. And it's a muscle, because we go in and we don't go in saying we're going to teach them the Red Ventures way. We go in and saying, how can we be better, let's say, with the CNET way? And, and when people realize that you truly mean it, that you're there to say, hey, we think you can teach us a bunch of stuff. And it's like, all of a sudden, it's like when you see, and no offense here, but, people drive in New York a certain way, right? I was a limo driver in Boston and when I was in college. So, but the people in the Northeast have a special driving style. You come to Charlotte and everybody's letting you go and everything. People from New York come to Charlotte and they're letting you go. You adapt to the culture where you're in. And what you see is a lot of people start kind of aligning to the way that people kind of behave. So it doesn't work every time, but I'm actually more of a believer now that fundamentally most people want to be in a place where they're invested in, the people want to win, people want to be a part of something special. And in this day and age, people want to be in a company that is trying to do a lot more than just make money. And I think that's what makes us today, you know, a little differentiated from other places.
Well, talk a little about diversity and inclusion, which, you know, has a very prime spot on your website and obviously much more broadly at the company, and how that relates to what you just talked about.
You know, Jonathan, you know, you mentioned earlier things that maybe I wish I would have done wrong. I wish I would have taken this a lot more seriously much earlier. In the middle, the first time I went back into the office was in June, when the George Floyd situation was exploding, and you know, we were all kind of called to task to say, you know, what are we going to do about this? You know, and after much reflection, I came in and I did an all-employee meeting with nobody there, just me and the cameraman. And you know, my message was to our 600 Black employees saying, I'm sorry. I'm sorry because we have been complicit. You know, we have stayed quiet when, you know, staying quiet is the equivalent of being, you know, as guilty as those that are, you know, doing active things about this. And we created a group, and we have, the numbers are, you know, already showing, you know, I think people want to know that you care, that it matters, that you're making it a priority. So we have everything from reevaluating all our processes for biases, from, you know, reviews to hiring, to mandating certain, you know, new processes around how do we engage people, to reinvesting more deeply. I want half of our class that starts of analysts to either be Black or people of color. I'm Puerto Rican. Like, I should have gotten it. You know, if you're a white boy from somewhere, right, maybe you didn't get it. But the fact that I didn't get it and I'm a minority, it's shame on me. But I told everybody, judge us in 5 years, judge us in 10 years. This is not an overnight thing. You got to make a real commitment, and you got to make it part of your fabric. And that's when we added our 7th belief. It was our first belief, and we added it that day. And that belief is around, we believe we can be the change we want to see in the world. It's a very aspirational belief. It's going to be a hard thing to do, but I think it's worth pursuing.
So, you know, your business itself is a little bit shocking on a number of levels, in that, you know, right now, people who are in the content business are not, with very few exceptions, doing great. A lot of them are closing down, and a lot of them are begging to be bought by you. And you've got obviously many dozens of different brands that are part of your network. But I think for outside folks looking in, they wonder, well, there's a gazillion websites and content out there. Which one is relevant and fits here? And as I said earlier, there are few people I know who are more focused on what makes sense and what doesn't make sense for what you're trying to build. So articulate for me what it is that makes an asset fit in the Red Ventures network.
You know, first of all, I believe that the only way to make money in life, or the best way to make money in life, not the only way, but the best way to make money in life, is to find an uncrowded trade and have a different point of view on it, right? If it's a crowded trade, the trade itself takes away a lot of the upside. So you know, anybody can chase the obvious, but that's a crowded trade. We have a point of view that there's going to be a renaissance of great media brands, not every media brands, but of the right media brands that are very focused in editorial and in content and on data and on customer experience and on simplifying the journey, brands that stand above any bias. I think today the biggest issue we have with media is, who do you trust? You know, how am I know that I'm not being, you know, manipulated by this data? And I'm sure you have seen the social dilemma, right? In the fact that, you know, I think this is a real issue. I think a lot of these business models where we are the product is fundamentally a real issue. So we believe that by, you know, layering a well-run media company with performance marketing as, you know, helping consumers transact, leading to an authenticated platform where you help consumers over a much longer period of time, it really can transform some of these great media assets. I'm super excited about our next one. Stay tuned. But I think there's some really great properties today that everybody's running away. And maybe we're wrong. And if we're wrong, you know what? We either learn to play the next game, or this is the one that does us in. But you know what? We like our bet.
So maybe as a last question, before I open it up to some questions from students, maybe as a way to put a finer point on that, why don't we talk for a moment about CNET, since we both worked a little bit together on that. Just talk about the process by which you identified, and you did identify, that this is exactly the kind of brand that makes sense for you. You knew there were other people who would want it, but you also thought that you would be uniquely positioned to be able to turn it into something else. So just talk about that decision-making process on the front end, and then the execution to getting to, it's a $500 million deal.
Well, as you know, when the process got going, we were a bit on the outside looking in. And your help was superb. And I'm not saying this because there's a crowd listening, but I'm not sure that without your counsel involvement, we get there. And I told you this the other day when we closed, that you made a big impact on the transaction, and you were tremendously helpful to me. So forever grateful on that. We believe that CNET is one of the great brands of the internet. It's just a tire brand that has been underinvested. It's sat inside of CBS and then CBS Viacom, and it's been treated as a third-class citizen. It's a brand that is an authority on all things technology, and this day and age, technology is horizontal in every industry. So we love the kind of the pliability of that asset. We love its editorial integrity. We love kind of the deep commitment to true research. Is an asset that aggregates a lot of intent on consumer. There's a big difference in terms of what traffic, what kind of traffic and what the traffic is worth. I think CNET and a lot of the sister brands are brands that are at the top of, both the quality of editorial, but as important, the quality of intent. So it was really a platform more than just a business and an asset. And it gave us, we have pattern recognition. Owning Healthline over the last 15 months gave us a sense as to kind of this integrated model, which wasn't as clear, 3 years ago. So you got to be really learning as you go through this journey. And once, as you know, we pass on most things. We're disciplined. We make mistakes. We look back, and we may have lost some things, but once we lock in on something, you got to kill me you got to kill us at the goal line, because we're not going to give up. And in this one in particular, we did not give up.
All right, I'm going to read some of the questions we got from the students. What are some of the biggest challenges and opportunities for the digital marketing, media, and technology fields? Obviously, there is a lot of roadkill, certainly in ad tech, in MarTech, but there are some success stories, and obviously you guys have done extraordinarily. What are the biggest challenges for those who haven't made it, and where do you think the biggest opportunities are?
Yeah, clearly this is a world where the Googles, Facebook, the Googles and Facebook of the world are completely kind of absorbing a lot of the media dollars that are getting spent. So you have to have a point of view on how you can leverage the best out of those platforms. So you have to be great at them, but you have to survive without them. So, there's room, because I do think the consumer wants other options. I think brands want other options. But I think those business models where you are the consumer, or, in the case of Google, there are other drivers of that model. I think there's models, but you have to have scale. You have to have, enough breadth to be able to stand, as an equal in from a consumer value standpoint. So that to me is the thing that we're chasing after. I would love someday, 10 years from now, to people kind of put us in, that same sentence. It's a huge aspiration, but it's worth pursuing.
Someone's asked, how do you think digitization will disrupt business next? And maybe in the context of your business model, performance marketing has been, nobody does it better than you, but I would be nervous that Google's going to figure out some way to make it harder for you to do your job.
Yeah, this is not for the faint of heart, right? There are existential risks in everything we do, and a bit of this is why we're so focused on authenticated experiences. Like for example, our Bankrate business went from 0 authenticated users to over 1 million in a year. We'll be at 5 million next year, right? So you're kind of running against the clock. But once you have everybody authenticated and you're collecting real data on consumers and you're engaging them in a high value way, you start protecting yourselves from one single decision. But I think the end of the cookie world is going to be really interesting. I think it's gonna really challenge Facebook and a lot of what they do for their algorithms. I think government policy may work. I think if I think the big techs, this better than anybody, they probably have a huge sigh of relief on the change of administration, because I think if nothing else, it resets the deck for a while, and they were increasingly becoming target in the crosshairs. But those things will happen over time. They just take a lot longer. But you're the expert at this, so maybe that's a better question for you.
I think you're the expert. And speaking of something that you might be an expert on, somebody is asking what your advice to a current student who is aspiring to say, I don't know, launch a tech-focused holding company. And put it in the context of, if you were doing it now, if you were trying to do some version of what you were trying to do then, or at least the 2.0 version of what you were doing then, what would you do different? How would one go about it?
The challenge is, for every Mark Zuckerberg out there that is a genius and figures something out and kind of was relentless, there's thousands of other people that did not have any experience and went down that path. So I still stand by the thought of, if you're serious about wanting to be an entrepreneur, not a one-hit wonder, going to learn somewhere is a really good advice. It could be 3 years, it could be a long enough period of time that you can have different experiences. The world is going to change a lot. There's a lot of technologies, from everything from nanotechnologies to AR and other forms of artificial intelligence that I think this is going to look really, really different. So have a point of view. I think the environment is going to become hugely important in the next 20 years. And there's going to be many ways to play that bet. Find something that you think it's a big bet and find an angle for it, and then tie it to something that you think you can. We people don't understand. A lot of young people say, well, I'm not really sure what my passion is. Well, you're not supposed to know. And as a matter of fact, most people that are our age, Jonathan, don't really still know their passion. I think what we end up becoming passionate about are the things that we do, and we get better at it. So we do them more and we get better at them, and all of a sudden that becomes your passion. So, find your natural bents and then commit to them. And as you get better at them, you start developing a passion for that feeling of getting better at something. It's not something that you say, oh, I found my passion. The passion finds you.
So you talked about living through the 2001 downturn. You also lived through the 2008 downturn. So what lessons more broadly from past economic crises would you offer to the students?
These are really hard times. I think this is much harder in my mind at those times, because while it may not feel like an economic crisis to everybody, it clearly is if you're in hospitality, if you're in travel, if you're a small business. But I think the digitization of some industries and the government really bailing out the consumer, at least so far, it's created a very weird, kind of winners and losers kind of game right now in this environment. But the unknowns of where we are, it's crazy that everybody knows there's 9 vaccines that have come out. And Pfizer announces today that theirs is looking good and the market goes up 1,000 points. People are like dying for good news. Like, I think between this and, kind of kind of what happened the weekend in this elections and everything else. But I just think people need to understand that this is really hard. And, no matter what your situation is, I see a lot of our employees struggling with some version of mental health. And we talk a lot about, mental fitness and what are you doing to build those muscles around mental fitness. So I just think all the students listening to this, that this too shall end, and it's going to end, probably in a year's time, and we will feel better when the spring comes and the flu season's gone. And we tend to project things indefinitely to the future and then come back to today and try to solve for that. Things will continue to change for good or bad. In this case, I think for good. And so, the good news is in 01, we had zero revenue. So it was a matter of like, were we ever going to have liftoff? In 08, we really were not in financial services. So it really didn't affect us all that much, maybe indirectly. And this time we have a true portfolio. So we've had some businesses like the Point Sky and like our creditcards.com business and some others have been really effective and done some have benefited. So net is fine for us. Like we navigated this really, fine. But I would just, it is in times like this that money is made. You don't make money when you're, in a crowded trade at the peak. And, our CNET buy was an example of that. As CBS had paid close to $2 billion for something we paid, somewhere between 400 and 500 million, depending on how it all falls. So, a lot of people think we're crazy, and maybe we are, but I think this is how you make money in life.
So you always knew you wanted to be an entrepreneur.
Let me clarify that.
Yeah.
My brother's a doctor. My sister's a lawyer. My other sister's a computer whiz. I was funny. That was my claim to fame. I was 3 out of 4. So it was the easy path for not having the IQ that my siblings had in a family where, education was highly valued. So.
Well, but having this self-awareness that you were not going to thrive with somebody telling you what to do is a valuable insight into yourself.
Yeah.
But going from that valuable insight to actually having to do it is a long journey. So of even though you knew that's where you were trying to go and where you were trying to get, what was the most unexpected part of the actual reality of being an entrepreneur?
It's a grind. It's an absolute grind. You have to love the grind. And the grind is when there are days and weeks that, it's not looking better, it's not feeling better. You don't feel like you're making progress. I have learned to love the grind. One of the things I've done in the pandemic is pick up tennis and pick up golf. I belong to this nice, club I've never been to. So now, since I'm working from home and I am playing both sports, and I'm terrible at both, but I love the grind because I love the journey of really kind of being, humbled by something and then trying to master it to the best of your ability. That's what life is about. That's what being a husband and a wife is about. That's what parenting. If you really, I'm sure you feel this way. There's no more humbling job in the world than being a parent, especially of a teenager. And I have 2 of them, right? And, so when you adopt this mindset that, you really have to become a student of all, in that while you're graduating from your business school, may be imminent, your learning has just begun. And really your next, 5 to 7 years are your apprenticeship years still. And then life will never end out. Now, I don't know you, Jonathan, but I have end of life issues with my parents and, and then when you're done, when your curve flattens out in learning, then it's your time to go.
Exactly. This is a provocative one. What are your expectations for the new administration in regards to regulation of big tech, data privacy that will impact your business?
I think we have so many other issues right now that, I'm sure, if Obama's administration is, a bit of the directive, I think that they'll back off a bunch in some things, which I'm not really sure it's right. It really depends on some of those key jobs, but, I think reestablishing, ourselves as a force of good in the world, and reestablishing our State Department all over the world, and reestablishing a lot of things. And there's been some positive things. I think you can tell my politics by what I'm saying, but at least my preference. But I think there's always good and bad in both, and I think there's some really good things that have happened as a result of this current administration. I just don't like a polarized world, so I'm looking forward to a more benign, kind of most powerful country in the world kind of approach to dealing with things. But I think the environment is a real issue, and I think it's going to become, and under this administration, a real rallying cry. And I think we're going to have to pay down this debt somehow, or inflate our way out of it. The fact that we haven't been here since 1940 something, this is going to be an interesting one. And I don't think it's fair to our kids what we may be doing to mortgage in their future. So how are we going to do that? I don't think we're going to touch taxes in the next 2 years unless, Georgia goes the other way, which will be surprising. But at some point, we got to pay for all this money we're issuing. The fact that we have $3 trillion deficit this year, that's insane. But then again, you know more about this than I do.
You mentioned the cookies issues and the privacy issues.
Yeah.
A lot of people's perspective is that the giants that you referred to are using the privacy issue as a way to pretend that they're protecting privacy, but really what they're doing is reinforcing their walled garden in a way to make it impossible for anybody else to play. What's your perspective on that, and whether there is a role? Because it sounds to me like you're generally not a particularly pro-regulation guy. Do you think that there is a role for government to do something about that?
I think too much power in the hands of too few is not a good thing. And I think if you look at the antitrust laws that were meant to protect the consumer from price gouging and things like that, and that's not the case now, right? So even the law is probably not even applicable to this extent. But the fact is that, should Facebook own Instagram and Facebook, and have that kind of control and be able to throw out any competitor in that regard? Should Google own YouTube and Google and the ad tech underneath? And I think, Apple very different, owns the ecosystem, and what's the fairness of the App Store and all the issues that you're having there. Clearly Apple is trying to be on what they believe is the right side of history from a privacy standpoint. And I think Google probably resembles more the remark you made. And I think Facebook is the one that I think will have more challenge to deal with this, but they'll figure it out. Like, there's only a few people that are really going to win in AI, and it's them and it's Microsoft, and it's a handful of others that are going to be able to aggregate enough of the talent to truly put in place true machine learning. All of us are going to hobby at it on the other side, at least for a while.
Great. Well, I think we're about coming to time. I'm going to turn it back over to Tanvi, but Rick, I just can't thank you enough for the time and for your openness and candor and sharing your experiences and your perspectives.
No, that's my absolute honor. So it's good seeing you, Jonathan.
Well, thank you so much to Rick Elias and Professor Neep for such an insightful discussion. I truly learned an incredible amount, and I'm leaving this feeling very inspired, so thank you. Thank you also to Dean Maglaras for providing the opening statements, and thank you to all our attendees for coming through to tonight's session of the Leadership Speaker Series. We hope to see you all for the next session of the series on Monday, November 16th, so next Monday at 8 p.m., featuring Robert Smith, class of 94, founder, chairman, and CEO of Vista Equity Partners. So yeah, thank you all and have a wonderful evening.
Great. Thanks again, Rick.
Thank you. Take care.